We continue now. The COP21 president and French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius says that the nations battling to forge a climate deal are making good progress. Now, the deadline for a deal is meant to be Friday. However, a senior Chinese negotiator says it is very likely that the summit will continue into Saturday. The French presidency was due to present a second draft of the final agreement in the coming hours. Now, the first draft released on Wednesday still had large areas where no consensus had been reached, and many climate campaigners said it was too weak. And while leaders work on a deal to save mankind from global warming, the aid organization Oxfam dressed up protesters with giant heads in the image of world leaders. Now, they say they want world leaders to wake up and recognize the climate chaos that will take place if they fail to secure a strong international agreement during those talks. And one of the areas of the world that will likely be most affected by climate change, rising sea levels, is the Caribbean. And so now we turn to our Caribbean correspondent, Allison Kentish, who is covering the climate talks. Allison, how have Caribbean countries, they expect to be very affected by climate change, rising sea levels, many of them, because they're simply small island nations. So how are they reacting now to this first draft that we now know we have of an agreement that was released yesterday?
Yes, good evening. And you are correct. The latest draft from the Paris climate talks was issued about 3 p.m. yesterday. And I can tell you that Caribbean countries were happy to see the level of protest that followed the issuing of that draft. Immediately after the draft was issued, hundreds of protesters held a sit-in demonstration, and they called for a better deal from the talks. They're saying that that deal should be based on climate justice. So they're calling for stronger action to protect the most vulnerable communities and countries in the world, and that, of course, includes the small island states of the Caribbean. Now, a plenary session on the draft ran into the early hours of this morning. At 3 a.m., Caribbean countries were still in session, still clamoring for that 1.5% cap on greenhouse gas emissions. They got some support from India and Malaysia. These two countries called for solid commitments from wealthy nations to provide financial support for the poorer countries to cope with the impacts of climate change. Now, all this happened within the last 12 hours, and a new report was issued by the United Nations a few hours ago, and that report stated that recognizing the link between climate change and human rights is an important step towards protecting the fundamental rights of communities across the planet. Now, in terms of the Caribbean, the islands are still holding out some hope, and St. Lucia is leading the 15-member Caribbean community known as CARICOM. St. Lucia is leading those negotiations on behalf of CARICOM, and the country's Sustainable Development Minister, Dr. James Fletcher, has been articulating the CARICOM position that global warming needs to be kept below 1.5 degrees Celsius. He's saying that it is a perspective shared by the Association of Small Island States known as AOSIS, and is now being championed by a growing number of developing countries. So the Caribbean maintains hope. They are holding on to that hope until this agreement, the final agreement, is released.
And I should clarify here, Allison is in Paris. Is that right? You're in Paris covering the summit. Is that right, Allison?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. I'm based at the Caribbean Pavilion.
Okay, so tell us exactly where we are in the process now. Do we have that second draft yet, and are there signs of progress between the two texts? Can they complete a deal by tomorrow?
They are hoping that they can. Dr. Fletcher, who leads CARICOM's negotiations, is saying that it's not a terrible deal, what is being proposed now, but there are some areas where, especially finance, where there are some sticking points, and he's hoping that those can be clarified. But it will be a really taxing next day and a half, because they are saying that they will work all night tonight. It's just about after 6 here in Paris. and they intend to pull another all-nighter if necessary to ensure that they get what they want. But let me make it clear that Caribbean countries have said that they will not accept a bad deal. They came to Paris determined that no deal is better than a bad deal. So they are willing to walk out if they don't get what they want, which is that 1.5 degrees cap.
All right, Allison Kentish there covering the COP21 summit from Paris, especially from a Caribbean point of view, a part of the world that will be dramatically affected by climate change. Allison, thanks so much.
Thank you.